When a wealthy CEO named Amelia is stranded in a snowstorm, she has no choice but to seek help from a humble farmer named Thomas. But when she steps into his barn, something unexpected happens. He's frozen in place, struck by her beauty, and an unexpected romance begins to blossom. What starts as a desperate cry for help turns into a heart-melting love story neither of them saw coming. The snow fell like a silent curse over the winding rural road, thick flakes swirling in a blinding dance as the wind howled through the trees. Amelia Cross squinted through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel of her sleek black SUV. The heated seats and luxury dashboard offered little comfort as anxiety twisted in her chest. This wasn't how the day was supposed to go. She was supposed to be in Cedar Heights by now, seated in the grand ballroom of the Palisade Hotel, where she was to speak at a high-profile charity summit. Her speech was memorized, her designer suit was flawless, and her team was already at the venue, likely wondering where their CEO had disappeared. But fate had other plans. Her GPS had rerouted her to avoid a collision on the highway, sending her down unfamiliar country roads. At first she didn't mind. The scenery was quaint. Rolling hills, old barns, and thick woods offered a scenic detour. But then the snow began. And it didn't stop. Now she was stranded. The dashboard flashed warnings. The battery was draining faster than usual, and despite its all-wheel drive, the vehicle had slid into a shallow ditch. The tires spun uselessly. She was going nowhere. Amelia tapped her phone, no signal, of course. She leaned her head back against the leather seat and exhaled, her breath fogging the air. This was not a situation she was used to. She could command boardrooms, negotiate billion-dollar deals, and lead philanthropic initiatives across the globe. But here, in the middle of nowhere, in a snowstorm, she was just another stranded soul hoping for a miracle. She pulled her coat tighter around her and stepped out into the freezing wind. The snow stung her face. A thin sheet of white already covered her heels. She looked around, no signs of life, no lights, nothing but trees and open field. Until she saw it. Far in the distance, a faint plume of smoke rose from a chimney. There was a house, or maybe a cabin, tucked behind a row of evergreens. It was her only option. Grabbing her purse and bracing against the wind, Amelia trudged forward, each step a battle. Her city coat wasn't made for this. Her boots were stylish, not insulated. But she kept walking. By the time she reached the front porch of the modest farmhouse, her hands were numb and her legs ached. She knocked on the wooden door, praying someone was home. Footsteps echoed on the other side. The door creaked open to reveal a tall man with a rugged face, flannel shirt, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. He blinked at her, clearly surprised. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and cautious. "I'm sorry to bother you," Amelia said through chattering teeth. "My car broke down. I'm stranded. Please, I just need somewhere warm for a bit." He hesitated, his gaze studying her expensive coat, designer purse, and frostbitten cheeks. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." And just like that, Amelia Cross stepped into a world she never knew she needed. The warmth inside the farmhouse was immediate, almost jarring after the biting cold. Amelia stumbled in, grateful for the sudden heat that kissed her frozen skin. She hadn't realized how numb she had become until the blood began to return to her fingers, bringing with it a stinging burn. The man closed the door behind her and moved quietly to stoke the fire in the stone hearth. The living room was simple but clean. Wood-paneled walls, a threadbare but cozy-looking couch, a well-worn bookshelf, and the soft crackle of burning logs. A faint smell of pine, coffee, and something earthy lingered in the air. She stood awkwardly, still clutching her purse like a lifeline, her teeth chattering. The man glanced back at her. "You're soaked through. Sit by the fire before you catch something," he said. "Name's Thomas, by the way." "Amelia," she replied with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Thomas. Really, I didn't know what else to do." He nodded once, offering no more words as he disappeared into a side room. When he returned, he held out a thick flannel blanket. "Dry off with this. You're lucky you saw the chimney smoke. Most people don't come this way unless they're lost." "I was definitely lost," Amelia admitted, unfolding the blanket and wrapping it around her. She sat carefully on the edge of the couch, warming her hands near the fire. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind howled and shook the windows. Inside, the fire flickered warmly, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Thomas poured a mug of coffee and offered it to her. "I don't have cream or sugar. This isn't exactly a five-star place." She gave a short laugh, accepting the mug with slightly shaking hands. "It's perfect. Trust me, this is the best thing that's happened to me all day." He watched her quietly as she sipped the strong brew. Something about her didn't quite fit, not just the fancy coat or the elegant way she sat, but the way her eyes never stopped moving. Observing, calculating, like someone used to being in control of every situation. "You from the city?" he finally asked. New York, just visiting Cedar Heights for a charity event. She hesitated, then added, I'm a CEO. His eyebrows raised slightly. Figures, you've got that polished look, she smiled, unsure if it was a compliment or an observation. And you always lived out here, he nodded. Born on this land. After my folks passed, I stayed. Easier than starting over somewhere else. Amelia noticed the sadness that flickered in his eyes, then quickly disappeared. She didn't press him. After all, they were strangers. She was a stranded millionaire executive. He was a solitary farmer. And yet, something about the quiet between them felt oddly comforting. She looked out the window. The storm wasn't letting up. I hate to impose, she said hesitantly. But it doesn't look like I'm going anywhere tonight. You're not, he replied plainly. That car of yours won't make it out of that ditch until morning at best. She sighed, then gave him a small, embarrassed smile. Well, looks like I'm your very unexpected house guest. Thomas cracked a rare smile. Then you better get comfortable. It's going to be a long night. And somehow, for the first time in a while, Amelia didn't mind the idea of slowing down. Morning came with soft light spilling through the frost-laced windows. Amelia awoke to the smell of something cooking, the rich warm scent of eggs and bacon drifting in from the kitchen. She stretched beneath the heavy quilt Thomas had laid over her on the couch. Still wrapped in the flannel blanket from the night before, her body ached from the unfamiliar sleeping position. But there was a strange sense of peace in waking up without the pressure of meetings, phone calls, or deadlines. In the kitchen, Thomas stood over the stove, his movements efficient, calm. He wore a faded sweater, sleeves pushed up, and Amelia noticed how the morning light caught the gray at his temples. He looked like someone carved from the land itself. Solid, dependable. She hesitated in the doorway. Good morning, he turned with a nod. Hope you like your eggs scrambled. Sounds great, she crossed her arms, suddenly self-conscious in her designer blouse that had wrinkled from a night of couch sleeping. I appreciate your hospitality. Not everyone would take in a stranger during a snowstorm. You didn't look like a threat, he said, setting a plate on the small wooden table. Besides, it's the decent thing to do. Amelia smiled as she sat down. I haven't had a home-cooked breakfast in years. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Don't you have a chef, too? She said with a chuckle. But this is better. They ate in companionable silence. Outside the snow had lessened, but it was clear the roads were still impassable. Amelia glanced toward the window. Looks like I'm here another day. Thomas sipped his coffee. Storm should pass by tonight. I can help you dig your car out tomorrow. She nodded, then her gaze drifted toward the bookshelf in the living room. You read a lot, helps pass the time, he said. No TV out here. Just books, animals, and the seasons. You live alone, by choice. That made her pause. She studied his face, the quiet sadness behind his eyes. Is it really by choice? He met her gaze, unflinching. Sometimes solitude is easier than disappointment. The words lingered in the air between them. Amelia looked down at her coffee, her own thoughts darkening. I get that, she said softly. More than you know, and in that shared silence something shifted. That afternoon, Amelia wandered through the modest home, discovering small details about Thomas that made her feel oddly welcome. A faded photograph of a younger man with a woman and a child, an old guitar leaning in a corner, and a weathered journal on the side table with pressed flowers tucked inside. Thomas was outside feeding the animals when she joined him. Boots borrowed from his late mother, coat several sizes too large. The wind had settled to a whisper, and the snow glittered under the pale winter sun. You've built something beautiful here, she said, watching as he poured feed for a few goats and chickens. It's not much. No, she insisted, it's real. And that counts for something. He gave her a curious look, and for the first time she saw him soften. Why were you really heading to that summit? He asked. Amelia hesitated. Public relations, she admitted. To make my company look more human. But it was also personal. I grew up in foster care, never really had a family. So giving back became my mission, Thomas nodded, wiping his hands on a cloth. You ever go back, look for your family? No point, she said quietly. They left me. I figured I'd make a better family out of the people I chose along the way. He seemed to understand that more than words could express. My wife died 5 years ago, cancer. We couldn't have kids. After she passed, I just stayed. I'm sorry, she whispered. So am I, he said, voice tight. But life keeps going. You either let it bury you or you plant something new in the soil it leaves behind. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. She looked out at the field. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of love, of success. But I don't think I've ever just stood still and let someone see me. Thomas didn't say anything. He simply stood beside her, his presence grounding. And for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt seen. As the hours passed and the storm faded, Amelia found herself relaxing more than she ever had in the last decade. She and Thomas spent the evening cooking together, a task she fumbled through with laughter and flour on her cheeks. He showed her how to knead dough, how to slice vegetables properly, and how to season stew without needing a measuring cup. "I feel like a different person here," she said over dinner. "You are," Thomas replied. "At least the version you let out." She looked up, surprised by the weight of his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the city may have made you tough, but it didn't kill your softness. You've just forgotten it's still there." Amelia didn't know how to respond to that. Her whole life had been structured around power, image, control. And yet here, in this rustic farmhouse with a widowed farmer, she felt more like herself than she had in years. After dinner, they sat by the fire again, talking about everything and nothing. She told him stories about boardroom drama, about how people underestimated her because she was young and a woman, about the pressure of being perfect all the time. Thomas listened without judgment. When she finally stopped talking, he handed her another blanket and said, "You don't have to be anything here. Just be." Later that night, lying again on the couch, Amelia stared at the ceiling and whispered into the darkness, "What am I doing with my life?" For once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. The next morning, Thomas helped Amelia dig out her SUV. The roads were still slick but passable, and she had a flight to catch if she wanted to make her next meeting in Chicago. As she packed her things, she felt an ache in her chest she hadn't expected. This was supposed to be a pit stop, a fluke, but it had become something else entirely. Thomas walked her to the car, silence hanging heavy between them. "You'll be okay out there?" he asked. She nodded. "I always am," but her voice cracked just slightly, betraying the truth beneath. Thomas hesitated, then reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't always have to be." Her breath caught. She stepped closer, unsure if it was foolish or brave. "I don't want this to be goodbye," she admitted. He looked into her eyes, the unspoken emotion lingering. "Then don't let it be." She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "I'll be back. I need to figure out what that means." And then she drove away, the snow melting behind her tires, her heart torn between the world she built and the life that had quietly begun on a quiet farm. New York City hit Amelia like a slap to the face. The noise, the urgency, the cold detachment of concrete and ambition, it was everything she had built her life around. Yet for the first time, it felt hollow. Her sleek apartment with panoramic skyline views felt sterile, impersonal. The familiar aroma of imported espresso and freshly ironed suits couldn't chase away the quiet ache she brought back with her. Her assistant, Rachel, greeted her with the usual rapid-fire updates about contracts, mergers, and an upcoming investor dinner. Amelia nodded through it, replying on autopilot. But part of her mind was still at the farmhouse, remembering the way Thomas looked at her, the sound of his quiet laughter, the smell of wood smoke and stew. That evening she stood by her window, a glass of wine untouched in her hand. The skyline shimmered, but all she saw was the light flickering from Thomas's hearth. She had never allowed herself to miss anyone before. Now she did, and the truth terrified her. Over the next few days, Amelia resumed her CEO role with precision. She closed a major deal, appeared on a televised business panel, and gave a speech about corporate responsibility that was met with standing ovations. But inside she was unraveling. Every photo op, every boardroom meeting felt like an act. Her apartment felt too big, her schedule too full, and her heart too tired. She began to ask herself questions she had never dared to consider. Was this really what success looked like? Was power enough without peace? Had she traded something real for something polished? Her therapist noticed the shift. "You seem distracted," she said gently during a session. "Is there something or someone on your mind?" Amelia smiled faintly. "A man, a farmer, a different world," and just like that the mask cracked. Instead of burying the emotions, Amelia began leaning into them. She started avoiding unnecessary meetings, delegating more, and spending time with the charitable foundation she had created years earlier, one that now felt like a lifeline. She began visiting shelters, not just for photo ops but to talk, to listen. She met women who had aged out of foster care like she had, young men trying to find work after addiction, veterans, runaways, survivors. One night after a visit to a youth shelter, Amelia sat in her car and cried for the first time in years, not out of pity, but because something inside her was waking up. She didn't just want to donate, she wanted to build. Back on the farm, Thomas returned to his routines. He chopped wood, fed the animals, fixed fences. But nothing was the same. The silence felt heavier, the nights colder. Her laugh lingered in the corners of the house, and he kept reaching for a second mug of coffee before remembering she wasn't there. He tried to convince himself it had been a fluke, just two strangers colliding in a storm, but deep down he knew better. She'd left a mark. A few times he thought about calling her. He even drafted a letter, something honest, simple. but each time he crumpled it up, what could he offer her, really? A quiet farm, a worn-out man with a broken past, and yet hope is a stubborn thing. Not a marriage proposal, not yet. This was something else entirely. Amelia sat before her board of directors and presented a radical new initiative, a vocational training and recovery center built on rehabilitated farmland just outside the city. It would provide shelter, job skills, and therapy for the homeless and formerly incarcerated. This isn't just philanthropy, she said. It's personal. We're not fixing broken people, we're investing in potential. There was hesitation at first, but Amelia was persuasive, passionate. The board approved the pilot program, and Amelia made a decision. She would resign as CEO once the center launched. She no longer wanted to live a life that didn't match her soul. Spring was coming early that year. The snow had melted, the fields were waking up. One afternoon, Thomas heard the sound of tires on gravel and looked up to see a sleek black SUV rolling slowly down his drive. She stepped out, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair in a ponytail, a small suitcase in her hand. "Hi," she said, smiling nervously. He blinked, stunned. "You came back. I told you I would." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then he moved forward and wrapped his arms around her. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. Amelia stayed for a week, then two. Her phone buzzed constantly, but she ignored most of the calls. Together she and Thomas worked the land, planted herbs in the garden, even painted the old barn. They talked late into the nights, about his late wife, about her childhood in group homes, about regrets and dreams. One morning she told him about the center she was building. "I want it to be on land like this," she said. "Quiet, safe, healing." He looked at her, brow raised. "You asking me to give up my farm? I'm asking if you'd be willing to share it." His smile was quiet but full of wonder. They moved slowly, deliberately. No rushing, no labels, just two people choosing each other, one day at a time. Thomas taught Amelia how to ride a horse. She showed him how to file a digital grant proposal. They laughed a lot, fought a little, loved more. Amelia began splitting her time between the city and the farm. She wore fewer heels, grew her own tomatoes, and started waking up without an alarm. "I feel like I've come home," she whispered one night. "You have," Thomas said, and kissed her forehead. But life isn't a fairy tale. A powerful investor tried to sabotage the foundation when she refused to turn the vocational center into a for-profit venture. Legal threats were made. Articles were written. "You should come back to the company," Rachel urged. "You're losing control." But Amelia stood firm. "Maybe control isn't what I need anymore." She returned to the farm that night, shaken but resolute, and Thomas held her without asking questions. She wasn't running from the storm anymore. She was weathering it. Despite the setbacks, the center opened that summer. It was called The Haven, and it was beautiful, nestled on 10 acres of donated land with solar panels, greenhouses, art rooms, and workspaces. Thomas was there on opening day, standing beside Amelia as she gave her speech. "I used to think love was something you earned," she said, voice clear. "Now I know it's something you give, freely, without conditions." The applause was thunderous. But the moment Thomas reached for her hand and held it tight, that was the real victory. The years began to unfold like chapters in a book neither of them wanted to end. Amelia published a memoir that became a bestseller. Thomas started teaching agricultural workshops at the Haven. They traveled, not to boardrooms, but to places with stars and silence. They never got legally married, though people often assumed they were. "To love someone without ownership," Amelia once said, "is the truest form of commitment." Thomas agreed. They had found something deeper than contracts or rings. They had found belonging. By the 5th year, Amelia had fully transitioned out of corporate life. Her time was split between writing, mentoring, and working the farm with Thomas. Together they adopted 2 dogs, rescued a few horses, and opened a small bakery in the town nearby. People called them the city lady and the farmer, and they laughed every time. Amelia had never imagined a life like this, and yet it was everything. One day in late autumn, Amelia stood at the edge of the field where she'd first seen the farmhouse chimney through the snow. Thomas walked up beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Crazy to think it all started with a broken car," she murmured. "It didn't," he said. "It started with 2 broken hearts that finally found each other." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the sun set over the land that had saved them both. They never needed to define their story. It wasn't about wealth or tragedy, or even the dramatic storm that brought them together. It was about a choice, to love, to grow, to start again. And in the quiet of the farmhouse, with firelight flickering and the world slowing down outside, Amelia knew she had made the right choice. She had stepped into the unknown, and found everything she'd been missing, the end.